This podcast is sponsored by Camera Museum of London and Tang Cigars, located at 44 Museum Street, London. Welcome to a Fish Out of Water podcast. This is your host, Richard Lipman. Today, we are interviewing Bruce Findlay.
The press and
These
these days
changed.
Yes, I think it's changed dramatically. To be honest, there have been several genuinely innovative and interesting breakthroughs, creative and commercial breakthroughs this year in the UK and in the world market. There have been things like the soundtrack from Trainspotting, which has done an awful lot for British music in the world, in America, particularly sort of dance scene. The Prodigy's breakthrough, the Verve comeback. I mean, it's ridiculous to talk about the Verve having a comeback, it's such a new band still, but the Verve, Radiohead, who have quietly crept up and become the biggest band around sort of thing. Now these artists have got that 15 years ago, if these artists were breaking through at the same time as what was happening to the Spice Girls and Oasis. The Spice Girls and Oasis were put in perspective. The hype around the Spice Girls and Oasis albums and records coming out was comparable to a Beatles album coming out. But a Beatles album coming out 3-4 albums into their career. These artists, the Spice Girls, their second fucking album, Oasis, their third album. The pressure on them, the pressure put on them by the press and by their record company perhaps, and maybe by their management and their bosses, and particularly to live up to the sales expectation. I'll tell you, the obvious thing is, how about making a good album? Exactly. The pressure on them is different. Bullshit. It's image and sales and stature, and it's size stature. It's not credible stature. It's not, artistic stature. I'm not saying we've got to be compared, but it is an art form. This is culture. It's a culture. Rock and roll's culture. It's something that young people feel is part of their life, and we need it. It's our voice. No, we don't. We need the Spice Girls for the pop music business, which is a different thing from culture. And that's where I think the media has got it wrong. The emphasis on a nanny in America and her child, that's the biggest news of the year. Diana, it's big news because she's an extraordinarily famous person, but the mass hysteria that surrounds it is ridiculous. And at least they've channeled it into charitable stuff, and hopefully the money that is raised genuinely will go, and we will hear of the great deeds that are done from the charitable trust that's been set up for Diana. I hope that's all we hear, in which case I'll forgive the amount of press that Diana's got this year. The press that the Louise Woodward got is ridiculous, way beyond proper news when there are really serious issues. And so when I talk about how awful the press are in pop music terms, it falls into insignificance compared to the front page news that is given to events that happen, but they're sensationalist when there are more important things to write about. And in musical terms, there are just more important things to be concentrating on than the Spice Girls. No disrespect to them. We've always had them. We've always had the Monkeys and Mr. Blobby and or whoever. No disrespect to Take That. But it's interesting. Take That are one of the biggest selling acts of the last 8 years. But if you ask young people in Manchester, who are the 3 artists you most identify with from Manchester in the last 8 years, it's going to be people like Happy Mondays, isn't it? It's going to be Oasis, and it's going to be maybe even Simply Red. Stone Roses, definitely, And of course, you go a little bit further back, New Order, what came from the New Order factory thing. More than Take That. Take That could come from anywhere, quite frankly. It's hard to think of Boyzone as an Irish band, but there's no mistaking that U2, not because they're going about with shillelaghs or wearing the Irish flag on their heads or anything else, but we know they're from Ireland, and they're a great international rock group. Stone Roses were a great international rock group, as are Oasis for that matter, but they're not. And they're proud of being from Manchester. That's the point. We all know where they come from.
Yeah, but they're so proud that they don't even live here.
Well, Oasis disappointed me there, though. Whereas Simply Red did, and so did New Order. And in fact, these artists that stayed here having had success, really benefited the city and inspired new bands. And these are the bands I like. And the bands that are inspiring today, this year, and I'm talking about the commercially successful bands, not the underground bands, of which there are many, and they are every bit as influential in their way. But in terms of the chart bands, we know when we talk about the Beatles and the Stones, they were big chart bands, but they were cool and influential. Well, I think the more influential bands this year are Radiohead, Verve, Prodigy, etc., rather than Oasis. And no disrespect to Oasis either, but Oasis have now become mainstream. They're a mainstream rock group. And that's it. You just don't feel you're going to hear anything particularly new from Oasis. In fact, you wanted it, but it wasn't there. And I think that's what's unfair on Oasis, and even more unfair. I mean, nobody could have ever expected some work of Sgt. Pepper type proportion or Thriller type proportion from the Spice Girls. Sales-wise, perhaps. I mean, people are talking about Elton John's single is the biggest selling single of all time. This Diana tribute album is going to become the biggest album of all time. The Teletubbies is going to become the biggest single for Christmas. With the utmost respect, that's nothing to do with art or culture.
Were they invented then, the Spice Girls?
I think the Spice Girls were absolutely invented, yeah. I definitely do, yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what they were. I think they wanted to be invented as well. I think people like Boyzone and 911 would accept that they are definitely taking on somebody else's idea and saying we can do it not only as well but maybe better. So in fairness to them, I think Boyzone are very, very, very good at what they do, to be honest. I mean, they do impress me when I watch them, and the guys got tremendous personalities, they're all great looking. They look better than Tate Back, and Tate Back were great in their way, as were the Osmonds. See, I'm not offended by these kind of bands in the least, because we've always had them. It's not stopped Neil Young emerging, or Lou Reed, or Bob Dylan. It seemed, yes, and this is my argument about the press today. What the press are, at least when the press recognised the phenomenal success of the Monkees and the Osmonds and New Kids on the Block, who were the biggest grossing act in the world, ahead of Michael Jackson and everyone else just 6-7 years ago. Who remembers them now? At the same time, the press were recognising the genius or the breakthrough or the excitement of X, Y, and Z, of a Stone Roses. Or, these are the artists we're inspired by. You ask young kids really who they're, young people are getting into bands and want to be inspired, and the names don't talk about Spice Girls or Oasis or Blood even, or bands like that. Even Pulp, are almost beyond the inspirational bit now. They've got to do something now. I think we're like Pulp still, but they've got to do, whereas Radiohead, people are saying that's a classic album. The Prodigy's breakthrough was great for dance music, and they're wild, and they've even got the cheek at their peak when they could be taken over from Oasis and such to bring out a record that was definitely going to get banned, and their video, no question, Slap Your Bum Bitch or whatever it's called, this new single of theirs. I kind of like them. They're controversial and cheeky and irreverent. They're not playing the game. They're not playing the media game. Ask the media, what the media game is. But if I told you what the media game is, then the media is sus. You've got to be one step ahead of the media. The media should not be, they're the tail that wags the dog. It's wrong. The media should be reporting what's happening. And they should also affect, the media can influence, and it influenced me in huge amounts of ways. We were famous not only for selling records, but for selling underground magazines and getting bussed for selling, like the Oz magazine and International Times and the Wee Red Book and things like that. And even in the punk days with Sniff and Glue, the great thing about the media was it championed the new movements. And at the moment, it's not really championing it. It champions the great sales success of British pop. It's a very London thing, all this Brit-pop and Union Jack. I'm pissed off with it. Fuck off with your Union Jack. And fuck off with your London. And fuck off with this Rule Britannia crap. And aren't we great because we're British? That's a pile of shit. It's a tiny wee world. And the British, what are the British now? We're not white, blue-eyed boys anymore. Sorry, mate. Findlay Quay is British. He's cool as fuck, and he comes from Edinburgh, and he's black. Okay, man? And that's what I like. And Britain has to wise up. we have to take stock of the influence that the minority peoples from our great fucking empire, that have come to live in Britain, because wasn't it great? We'll go to the homeland. I've come from Jamaica. It's going to be wonderful. I've come from Pakistan. I've come from India, and they've been treated like shit and suffered from horrible racism and run about the Americans, But gradually, in the last few years, black music, black British music, black music's American as far as I'm concerned. And no matter what Africa says, well, they all came from Africa, first of all. Hey, they needed to go to America, needed to be slaves and rough it. And maybe that's what's happened here, it's the chip in the shoulder bit. And I know as a Scot, we've always had a bit of a chip in our shoulder. And when something good comes out of Scotland, we really go, yeah! You need to suffer a bit. Well, I think our the other races of the world that have come to live in Britain over the last 10, just make sure that's out if it's dropped in the front for a minute. On your coat.
All right.
Oh, well, I don't know. On the bag? It may be in there, straight. You may be nicked it off. Yeah, don't worry. Yeah, I think at the moment, we've got a really good scene in Britain, and it's a sort of multicultural scene, and that could be the thing that really makes Britain fucking great again. Now, it's what made American pop music great. Where does rock and roll come from? Everyone claims it. The Scots, the Irish, the Africans. You know where it comes from? It comes from America. It couldn't have happened anywhere else. We needed that fucking god-awful place and that real mishmash of cultures that came in there and their great dreams of making a world, a real democratic, culture. And it didn't come through their politics or anything else.
It didn't work either.
It didn't work at all, no. And the struggle to find it, and the struggle to articulate that struggle,
Was that
rock and roll, is that it comes through music, of course. And that has explained an awful lot of our anguish, Richard. For me it has anyway. That's why I love it. It's my dictionary, it's my encyclopedia, it's my Bible, it's my philosophy, it's my politics, it's my sex, it's my confusion, it's my psychosis. Art and culture is, and for me, the greatest art form of the 20th century is not film, it's rock and fucking roll. And it's great for all its mates. And of course, rock and roll, unfortunately, because it comes out in discs and it's called popular music, everything gets put into that comes out on discs. But do the same for pictures, and do the same for theatre, and do the same for cinema. Don't compare the Spice Girls to the Beatles. Any more than you would compare, Julie Andrews to I don't know, Debbie Moore, or whatever. You know what I mean? Or any more than you would compare the green lady that you get in bookshops and the crappy paintings than you would with Picasso or something. They're both pictures, but come on. We know they're different. Any more than you would compare light comedy to Shakespeare. But they can both be great in their way, and that's why I can admire Take That. But when people say, how can you like Take That and Lou Reed? It's very difficult. There's no comparison. They're completely. It's a different football match. One's rugby. They play with a different ball. Another one's soccer. It's different. Just the fact that they use the same vehicle, they use discs, and it's called the record business, and it's called popular music. That's where we do need a bit of division. And I don't like divisions too much, to be honest. There's only good and bad, but but there's hip hop and this and that and the other. And that's why we have these titles, is to save us from being, allowing the comparisons to become distasteful, To become a non-argument, because we get people arguing about that. Are the Spice Girls better than the Beatles? No. And if people then say they're bigger, they're not even bigger. There's probably 1 week when they broke a record that the Beatles had achieved at some point, but nobody's even comparing them. It's not that. Size in terms of record sales is one thing. Size in terms of influence on the world is quite another. You could be quite small. How many people knew Jesus Christ during his lifetime? Or even heard of him? Or Buddha? Or Muhammad? Or anyone like that in those days? That is legend. When these people's names on artists, or of even the last century, painters, Van Gogh or whatever, and their legend lives on. Nobody's going to give a fuck about Take That. or about New Kids on the Block. You know, there will be a place in a Guinness Book of Records type listing, you know, of 20th century sales figures and such. But in terms of 20th century impact, and for that matter, impact into the 21st century, who from rock and roll will be remembered? We know Elvis will be remembered. You know, he's in the books of 20th century culture. The Beatles, undoubtedly. You know, Oasis have still got to really earn that place with the utmost respect of them. They were just the biggest phenomenon for a couple of years. And you've got to really be more than that. And was it just a sort of phenomenon, the same as Elton John singles, a phenomenon, one of these freaks? Or was it a meaningful thing? And I would say that, I mean, the Sex Pistols had a meaning. That was a meaningful thing. That late 70s thing, I mean, if it wasn't for the Happy Monday stroke Stone Roses thing, and neither of them ever realised the commercial potential that everyone talked about. Both of them were liable to be the biggest bands ever. And for a brief spell, they broke a couple of records or pulled a big crowd somewhere or sold, you know what I mean? But they didn't really set any records. They're not going to be in the Guinness Book of Records. But do they have meaning? I think so. I think without them, forget Oasis. In fact, forget Britpop. And forget the hip. Forget even the crossover. And I like bands that emerged then, not just from Manchester, but bands like Primal Scream, who developed a new sound. Primal Scream could have been just the Rolling Stones reincarnate, but Screamadelica, you know, with that.
The first track
Of pure Stones, but the Stones wouldn't have used these dance rhythms, you know.
they just added it on.
Well, that's all right, but that's all the Stones ever did to R&B from the 50s, as the Beatles did. I mean, I think Screamadelica is a truly great album, you know, and I think there are tracks that are nothing like the Stones as well, that are just pure psychedelic. And when I saw them live, it was nothing like the Stones. I'm not matching the Stones, to be honest. You know, it was different. That's the point. It was different, but the influence was. I'll tell you, they were more modern than Oasis. Oasis are just like the Beatles, but I don't think Primal Scream were just like the Rolling Stones. I think Primal Scream were very like the Rolling Stones, but with new influences. And unfortunately,
the early stuff was quite different.
But they reverted back. Well, they reverted back. Their last album was pure Rolling Stones, but Screamadelica with these, you know, Hallelujah, these dance rhythms on it was quite different from the Stones. In fact, the Stones began to do things like the Perfecto mix. I brought in remixing engineers to sound like Primal Scream, but I couldn't hear Paul McCartney getting together with the other two and trying to sound like Oasis. I think there would be a respect. The good thing about Primal Scream is, I mean, Bobby Gillespie, I don't think would ever dare to compare himself to Mick Jagger, whereas Noel and Liam have got the audacity to compare themselves. You know, sorry, sons. And even the Beatles didn't compare themselves to Elvis or anything. They wouldn't do that. They would say they're better now than Elvis was. You know, and I think Oasis could stand up and say we're making better music than Paul McCartney is. But in fact, they've got a problem now doing that. Not because Paul McCartney's doing anything great, but because they've now gone up their own arses. At least it took Paul McCartney about 30 years to do that, you know, or 10 years, even 15 years. Do you know what I mean? I mean, I think there has, rock and roll never really has very much respect and rock and roll artists for what's gone before. That's one of the great, Roll Over Beethoven is one of the greatest rock songs ever written. Roll over Beethoven, you know, and what it means. And it could be, you could sing the same song every year about last year's heroes. Roll over the Spice Girls, roll over Oasis, roll over the Beatles. But it's funny when you say Beethoven. Beethoven's still around. And it's funny, there's an irony there, there's a twist. I wonder if Beethoven might even outlast Chuck Berry. I think he's maybe even done it already. You know, and the Beatles certainly have already outlasted Oasis. Already. You know, Oasis can't, we know that Oasis can't go on to create the new legend. Nobody will create, and that's the problem. If you use the worst thing that ever happened was the Beatles. Because nobody will ever beat that in terms of, it's a phenomenon. But what they can do is have the same kind of influence on a generation. And I'm telling you, the bands that have a bigger influence on this generation musically are not Oasis or the Spice Girls. Only the media think that. They're wrong. And maybe for a brief period, Oasis, I think, did have that. Oasis were
controlled by the record company.
I think that the media have more control than the record companies. And the record company would love the Spice Girls to do better than they are. So who's hotter than? I mean, if it wasn't for the media, we wouldn't have known them splitting up with the management. I mean, I didn't go to the press and say, split up with Simple Minds. It wouldn't have made much difference, and shouldn't. If Paul McGuinness split up with Oasis, with U2 right now, and I'm sure he's got as big a, I think people have got much respect for Paul McGuinness as they have for, what's his name, Marcus Russell, or whatever it was that managed Spice Girls. The trouble is they have no respect for the Spice Girls themselves. I mean, at least people have respect for Simple Minds, or some believe they're actually, well, it wasn't nothing to do with their manager. Everyone knows it's all to do with their manager in terms of the Spice Girls. But Oasis are different. They've not started with their manager or the record company or anything like that. And their record company are meant to be, are thought of as the hippest record company in the land, Oasis. And they've got a good manager who's well respected, talks at seminars and things, he's up in Glasgow. Nice guy, pretty straight, well handled, and they've got a lot more cred than the Spice Girls. They're seen as a real rock group. And a year ago, I mean, you began to actually have nervous twitches thinking, Christ, this band could maybe have that kind of influence, It's just the influence side I never felt. I just thought they were really good. I really liked them. The influence was still to come. The maturity, that had to come. I mean, the Beatles' first few records were great and exciting. But if that's all they'd ever made, these first 3 albums, they would be historic. But there have been lots of other groups that made great historic albums. It was really only when they got into Rubber Soul and Revolver when we began to think, well, hey, this band are fucking serious. They're awesome. And then they came out with Sgt. Pepper, and then the White Album, and then they're up their arses, Magical Mystery Tour and things, But that period, I think, from Rubber Soul, Revolver, and Sgt. Pepper, which couldn't have happened without the previous 6 albums they'd made. The Beatles made, they were only around on EMI. They signed to EMI in 1962 and left. I mean, they made their last recording in 69, came out in 1970. They would say it was 70. 8 years. I mean, Oasis have been around 5 years already, 6 years. They've only made 3 albums. The Beatles were, the Beatles were had moustaches by that time. They were up to about their 10th album and lots of world tours. I mean, it's all so slow nowadays, and that's the record companies and the media. They work albums for so long, and they work them, forgetting that pop music, they're not writing symphonies, we're writing music for today, which means in January it could be out of date. We even know it. Most bands have written their songs, recorded them, toured them, and thought, I'm fed up with these songs, let's go to the next album. The fans demand nostalgia, and the media demands sales, and the record company and the stockholders, shareholders, they're looking for maximising. They're thinking 5 million selling records nowadays. A million selling records. Not that interesting. That's the attitude. That's shite, Richard. We don't need that. We don't need to teach kids that. Make great music. Change your life. That's what you mean to do with it. I want to have a revolution with this music. I want to make everyone feel sexually aroused. I want to make everyone feel suitably humbled and saddened by the story I'm going to tell them. I want people to feel high. I want to feel people to feel optimistic. I want people to feel life is so awful, they should be suicidal almost. I mean, it should really move you in extreme ways, and that's what rock and roll, the arrogance and the pretentiousness of rock and roll stars, and some of them aspire to that, and some of them, in my case, make it, for me anyway. Some of them have done as much for me as Picasso would ever have done, or Shakespeare would ever have done, no question. And although it's pretentious, or it seemed preposterous to compare the Beatles to Shostakovich or whatever it was, absolutely. I think maybe even more important, with the utmost respect, certainly to me, and it's what you can do for your generation. The Beatles' legacy is living after them, like Frank Sinatra, another icon of this decade, of this century, and so will Presley. But will Manchester? Well, of course it will. Yeah, no, the press do annoy me, and the press annoy me because we've got all these courses now saying, listen to Bruce Findlay about rock and roll. We should have journalists along saying, the people from certain periods in journalism which were great, And journalists, people like you, need to be inspired. I like the magazine. I was reading it when you were out. We need a revolution in this, because we do need the media. The trouble is the media have become more powerful. And the media are starting to earn hundreds of thousands of pounds a year. They're earning money like pop stars, which is just vulgar money. Pop stars shouldn't earn it either, for that matter. But everyone begins to believe their own press then, including the press themselves. And they're like spin doctors. You hear this guy, these guys, these pop pundits on all the time, spinning stories on the telly, as experts on life and how the media works. Fuck off. Rock and roll was never about that. They just didn't think that hard about it. We followed them. The media should catch on to what's happening instead of trying to say, well, where they're getting it wrong. I say, I know where they're really trying to come from. Do you? Give me a smack. You haven't a fucking clue. I think there's so much pretentiousness in the media, and when they give their attention to the mundane and the crap, because the record companies want it, it's almost like a conspiracy, isn't it?
It's a cycle.
Yeah, it's a cycle. And it's people being in each other's pockets. And it's because one of the things we do know is there is a schmoozing thing. That's always been the case. And what I like is the underground schmoozing. And let's get with the subversive ones. And let's talk to the underground. See, I imagine there are people living and when I say, in subterranean, these places under the streets of Paris. And I almost mean physically. And that's why I used to love hanging out in cellar bars. And in the 60s, the late 50s and the 60s, we hung about, not in bright, American-style razzmatazz places, we hung about in coffee shops and coffee bars, underground, lit by candles, and we felt like that. We thought there was going to be a knock on the door in a minute. What we were doing was just for us. And it was an element of elitist, but even the Beatles came from that whole beatnik phenomenon. And even the Cavern, and most of the clubs. And the one in Edinburgh was a place called The Place, very similar. It was an old tea warehouse, but it was cellars. It's a cellar-like feel and that kind of, dark, secret. Police keep out, old people keep out, straights keep out, that kind of vibe. And that's never changed. That's never, ever changed.
That's what that culture.
And it's not just youngsters. And that comes from grown-ups feeling like that because of wars where there had to be underground. The Spanish Civil War, in our century even. A lot of what happened in the 50s was to do, in fact entirely was to do with the wars. And people that had experienced war, Kerouac and such like that had experienced the Second World War. They're older than I am. I'm the next generation. I'm the ones that I'm the part of the generation that invented the hippie phenomenon, which turned this underground movement into a fashion. Hippies was fashion. Hippies was never hip. Hippies was a fashion. It was to do with looking beautiful and with long hair and pretending to escape. And shops sold all the stuff. We never bought fucking clothes out of shops. I never thought about it. We didn't sell the fact. We just had a look in the 50s on people that were kind of in that. It was a sort of hobo thing, a hobo look. Yes, it was to do with, in the case of Kerouac, it was ambiguous as well. He was on the road, he was escaping, he was running away, sexually he was fucked up, he was into drugs, he was rebelling against the system, he didn't have any particular answers. Hung out with a few people that thought he was cool as fuck, like Ginsberg, who did think they had answers. But they were funny. Unfortunately, Ginsberg sort of took it on, and he was like sort of guru of the hippie generation. Well, he was a great pal of Jack Kerouac's. And I loved all these crowds. I loved that whole scene, and bumping in and getting to know a few people and meeting them, Alexander Trotsky and people, and meeting Ginsberg, and meeting a lot of the sort of. But when rock was able to take it on, Dylan and Lennon are the two beat guys. There are lots of others. Nick Cave or somebody. I don't know. Nowadays there are equal, and you can see these people that try to look cool. You see them on stage, but you've either got it or you don't. And the thing about Kerouac and Lennon is they were painfully shy sort of people. John Lennon didn't look at his shoes when he was stage. He held it, his head was up there. Talk about that. He had a certain confidence about his singing and such like. But he never tried to do any of that. and he never tried to look moody. You know, and all these guys think they're being cool by looking moody. They don't. They look like they're trying to be sexy. Yeah, it's a rotten act, though. If you're good, I'll tell you, if you've got these moody, dark looks and you can do it. You know, I mean, Elvis had a certain look. We just had it, you know, and I'm not an Elvis fan at all. There are very few singers that can do that moody kind of, you know, and can do Iggy, yeah, but in a different way altogether. I'm talking about the girls will be screaming at. And guys are jealous because they're threatened as well. This guy still looks hunky, he's not poofy. I mean, David Bowie could do it, but he was always that slightly faggoty guy when he was doing the Young American. When he does Elvis Presley poses, he still looks a bit mincy. Because he's just a bit mincy. But when he does his mincy bits, though, I mean, Elvis couldn't do that. Elvis is too clumsy. Lennon could never do it. You know, Lennon was far too masculine. You know, looking, I mean, just as fucked up in his head, and I think very sympathetic, you know, to Brian Epstein, for example. Very sympathetic to him. David Bowie's AC/DC. No, the moody look is one where you've got to be essentially heterosexual looking, but beautiful at the same time. The trouble is, most of these guys do turn out to be like Rock Hudson or Cary Grant and people like that, but Elvis had it, I think. I'm trying to think. Maybe Sinatra, when he was young. I mean, he's pretty butch. You know, Sinatra, he had a kind of, you know, hey, I'm so fucking cool. You know. Robert De Niro, yeah, actors have got it. Actors have got it, yeah, but not pop stars. And so when pop stars are able to get it, you know, that even in that cool young way, Elvis Presley was seen as a James Dean, for example. And the great thing about Ewan McGregor's got it today. You know, I mean, certain film stars have got it today, and they'd love to be pop stars. They'd be track pop stars. James Dean would be a track pop star. Marlon Brando pop star. No, I don't think so. But there's something about it. See, my perfect image is a mixture of Elvis, not even Elvis because he's not one of my heroes, but Elvis because he was such a hero, and Marlon Brando. If you marry the two, now Elvis could never be Marlon Brando. But if he could, it would be Bob Dylan or John Lennon. That's who he would have manifested himself as. And for me, that's a fan thing. I'm talking a fan now. Lennon, and it's also an age thing. You remember, both John Lennon and Bob Dylan are older than I am, even believe it or not, but only 2 or 3 years older than me. So I can look up to them. A lot of the cool ones I see today, cool guys that I see today, and artists. It's the same with women. You know, I mean, I used to fantasize over Marianne Faithfull, the first Marianne Faithfull, and not again for 30 years until the current Marianne Faithfull. It happens all over again, you know. Actually, 10 years ago when she brought that broken English thing. You know? And but my original one was because I never liked women pop singers. They're all too fucking sissified for me, sticky out hair, Connie Francis and things. And musically, this girl wasn't so hot, but I loved it anyway. But it was Françoise Hardy, and she had this song called Tous les garçons et les filles de mon âge. And she just had this long hair and that sort of beatnik look. I don't know, she was stunning in French. These Brigitte Bardot kind of lips. You know, big Brigitte Bardot, so I love Brigitte Bardot. She's the only kind of really pretty woman that had big boobs and fabulous body that I've thought was the most beautiful woman in the world, because I really like sort of slim, flat-chested women with long hair, you know, and big lips. That's what I like. Tomboyish looks, you know, but really. Françoise Hardy, Marianne Faithfull was just stunning, you know, when she was young. And it's long, it's because they look kind of innocent. You know. I'd love to make you not be innocent. You know, girls that sort of are like that never talk. Marilyn Monroe did, but then there was an innocence about her as well. And same with guys. You know, there's an image. I don't know what it is. It's a vulnerability thing, but beneath the vulnerability is a knowledge that maybe can't quite articulate. That's why they're into pop music and acting, and that's what fans identify with in themselves. I do anyway. There's got to be something of me in the artist that I really love. I've got to get it. You know, I've got to get something from them. I've got to, otherwise they'll let me down. And of course it's harder. It's not. Of course I look for it. Yeah, and I look for it less now. because I've got to appreciate, it's very hard to get that same kind of feeling, it's got to be a memory of feeling almost, with guys that are half your age. And why, you know, you don't have to ever stop liking rock and roll. It's why it pisses me off when they fucking die. John Lennon was making my life very comfortable at 40. You know, when I was approaching 40, John Lennon turned just before he died, you know. And he came back with that album, which was a fairly mellow album. It was a very middle-aged kind of album. It's cool as fuck, though. More romance. And I know that he still had a bit of ice in him somewhere. It'll come out in a couple of years' time as well. But even just songs like Woman, you know, Woman, let me try to explain all that stuff, you know. And even little things like, I'm just sitting here watching the wheels go round and round. Fucking great. I mean, lyrically, it's great. And people say, yeah, but it's not like something he was into. Of course it's not. The guy is now just come out of a 5-year retirement, having that baked bread for his kid and trying to bring him up, you know, and all the shit he's gone through. And he's making a record like a 40-year-old should make. Oh, yes, I love that. And that's why I like Iggy and Neil Young and Lou Reed. Thank Christ they're still around and staying alive. Even David Byrne, but not very often, comes out with some. No, they're not, because the other guys are kind of Elton John and Rod Stewart and there. I can't identify with them, you know. So I'm much more no, but I can identify with young, and it's harder for me to identify with Oasis, who are just being like Johnny Rotten, but not without the smile. In fact, hey, everyone, yeah, fuck the world, man. Whereas the Verve, Prodigy, I think they're fucking great, you know. It's just, that's a sort of nostalgia thing for me, though. You know, I've got to look at the Prodigy, and I actually like it, you know. Yeah, like the punk movement. Punk movement did the same for me, because I was already old when punk happened. I was in my mid-30s when punk happened, so you don't get worried about your age at that time. I'd just go further back to the beat movement, the beat boom movement, I mean the early 60s movement, and the rock and roll thing even, which first turned me on. There's just something rebellious, and I mean much more than Liam and No. I mean, no, even that was that fucking video actually. Now that is the modern age, that's something that couldn't have happened. I think that's why I like them as well. That is something that it couldn't have happened 20 years ago. Not the Prodigy. It's too manufactured. You know, it's not like a real rock and roll band. But it is something to do with real stuff in the 1990s. You know, the technology, the sound of the band, the visuals. That video transformed them from being a fairly lightweight, handbaggy dance band into something hugely successful, but a bit harder edge and a bit more. The funny thing about them is that they're both frightening and funny at the same time. You know, depending who you are watching them, I suppose. You know. But I think they're wonderful, and I think Radiohead are great as well, and are more kind of slightly serious. That suits the college students and all the rest of it. You know, and they're a bit more thoughtful band, but I do think their music's wonderful. A lot of things over the last few years.
Tom Waits.
Tom Waits? Oh, that's... Yeah, he's cool as fuck. Yeah, Patricia Hind, Patti Smith, Laurie Anderson. I mean, there's still a lot of people that are not maybe necessarily as old as me, but they're kind of over 40 and under 60. A lot of them are between them, and even Joni Mitchell and such like. Even James Taylor is mellowed. But I like James Taylor, nice guy. I don't bother by him. I don't feel I'm a boring old fart if I listen to James Taylor. I don't buy his records anymore, but he's on the telly, I'll turn the volume up and watch it. And he was pretty square when he was young anyway. You know, I've seen far nicer many things. But he was cool. No, I think there are plenty of my own generation that still survive. Thank God Dylan's come back with a good album. And he was brilliant in concert a couple of years ago as well. Edinburgh. Now he's not the same hero to me as he was. I mean, he changed my life, but he doesn't make any difference to it now. He's become a bit of a gypsy now. And he just needs to make, now if he makes a good record, it's a good record. David Bowie still inspires me a bit, because he sinks and rises again, you know. And I was impressed with him at Barrowland in Glasgow just a few months back. I thought he was sensational. Yes, they're all right. A few new bands each year. There's only maybe one. I mean, that's why I do get. And I don't want to sound like the old people I've got cynical about the new pop phenomena. But I am more cynical. But I like to think I can justify it, because I do recognise this. Because I'm all for phenomena. I'm all for the recognition of somebody really making an impact on their generation. And I find myself defending it. What music?
The new
Phenomenon. Well, if you don't like it, you don't like it, is my attitude. I mean, if I don't like it, I don't like it. And I'll maybe accept a bit of the phenomena, but then I'll compare it to other phenomena. When I do like it, I'll look for Dylan. I'll look for the same thing I got. And when I see young people, and that's why it's maybe a year after a band's success nowadays that I'll begin to acknowledge it. Whereas if I was 30 years younger, I would know it. I mean, I didn't interview them live, but I interviewed them off air. But I did a radio show. I've also done radio, by the way, broadcast in Scotland on the radio. And did my own show 4 nights a week, and had demos. And really hip acts on things, you know, Edwin Collins and Chrissy Hynde, Radiohead, and people like that, and played Oasis and Hulk, obviously, and Blur. As I'm talking about 4 years ago. So, I mean, for me, I was also playing Frank Sinatra and the Incredible String Band and the Beatles, lots of John Lennon, Lou Reed, Perfect Day, and things like that. We were hip as fuck, and I played a lot of world music. I like some 1 or 2 of the French acts from 3 or 4 years ago, like Les Negres Verts and Mano Negra, and MC Solar, fucking cool as shit, you know. And I played a lot of Baba Ma, I played a lot of French African music, and because the French have always been, the good thing about going to France in the early 60s, when I was a kid, you know, well, an adult kid, 17, 18, is that the culture was much more mixed than it is here. Because it's mainland, the Arab influence, the North African influence on Paris was amazing, and on music. Their tolerance of American black jazz artists who were bombed out of America, but hung out in Paris. Paris was a cool place for black musicians to play. Although France suffers from racism as well, and nonetheless seems like a really much more multicultural society. It's just they're a bit more fascist about their music in France, and it's interesting that not more great music has come out of France, because it really should, and it's bursting to come out of France. I wish I was me, the kind of guy I am and the way I talk, and French, and lived in France, because I think I could revolutionize the French music industry and make it so popular around the world. I don't know if the French actually ultimately want it, but their artists do. I know, because I know a lot of French artists are so frustrated they can't figure out their own home territory. You know? But there is that, yeah. I mean, I used to play that sort of music, and I love, and so certain artists, and I never had left field on, but I played a lot of left field at that point. That one album, Leftism, you know. Because I wasn't dance music was huge as it has been for 10 years now. And I don't dig it, dance music, and most of it, because most of it's crap. But then when you think about the charts, most pop music's crap as well, and most rock music's crap. So dance is no different. But you've got to find it. The thing is, because I'm into rock and pop, I can always hear the good stuff. Because I'm not particularly into dance, I often miss the good stuff. When I was DJing and I was presenting a show, I was getting flooded with so much stuff. I was able to pick out some good stuff, or stuff that I think is good, you know what I mean? And it's, you know, you really have to be, going to record shops every day. I mean, I've had my own record shops. Wow. People used to say, you don't have a very good record collection. You should say, you've never seen my shop. You know, and I stocked records. I mean, I stocked back catalogue as well. I mean, good back catalogue. It was the best record collection in the world. But because I had record shops, I was spoiled for choice. You know, it's like not having lots of ice cream back at the house when you make ice cream actually in a shop, or sweeties, or you make shoes. You know, it's because I was there. So I don't have a great record collection. Believe me, it's strange. Since I had 78, Elvis Presley, 78, everything. You know, I have to have the best, easily the best record collection in the business in the world.
What did you do?
Well, they just give them away. I never kept. I never just didn't covet them. I just didn't hang on to them. Like, I mean, you think of all the books you've ever had, or all the magazines you've wanted to keep. And, I must keep that one. You know. In actual fact, they disappear. You give them to people, and you go where you move house. I've moved house too often. I've been married twice. I mean, but I've moved house too often as well. Even before I got married, John. But before I got married, I mean, I moved around from the age of 15 to 20 when I got married. 23, it's 8 years. So I did 8 years of, we were married twice, and even when I was married, we'd move house 4 or 5 or 6 times. And because I began to make money, which, I moved up, into the big giant house, and then back down again. So I've moved so much, you've just got to give these, I've still got some old records, but I'm missing a lot of records, a lot of cool records I used to have. I don't even have every single Simple Minds. I kept copies of every single Simple Minds record at the time, deliberately kept at least 2 copies, 3 copies sometimes, because I knew I would give them away. So I would always keep one, but that one's gone as well. The ultimate, get down to the last one. So it's a shame in a way, because I could have a super collection, but then I'm kind of against that collector mentality as well. I find that it's just not me. It's just not me. I need to be just that wee bit messy. Oh, where did I put that? Oh, well, I'm not too sure. It's a material thing, does it matter, And I think it's dangerous to get too nostalgic. I think you've got to have mementos. And I like mementos. I've lost a lot of people in my life. People have died. My mum and dad are both dead now. My mum died when I was quite young, just shortly after my friends, a few years. My dad only died a couple of months ago. He was 90. So he did a good thing. So I don't feel overly nostalgic about that, except it really is the end of an era. My brother's the oldest living member of my family, and I'm the second oldest. It's funny being the oldest person in your family. And my dad was like that, and you get quite lonely up there, And I was always young, and suddenly, I don't have lots of nephews and nieces, but I've got a few kids. I've got 4 kids. So getting too nostalgic is not part of my thing, although I enjoy immensely talking about the past. I actually enjoy more talking about once I know somebody and you get over that bit, and it's talking about now and the revolution and new politics and what's going to happen in the 21st century and what would it like to be 19, 20, 21, 22, today, what you're looking forward to. We worried about the bomb, you worry about the environment. It's a different thing. We don't have the Cold War. I was in East Berlin the day the Berlin Wall came down. I was one of the first people who checked Checkpoint Charlie with about 1,000 students. In fact, there were thousands trying to go through, and there were even more thousands on us had to meet us with champagne and flowers. And I was a guest of the East German Minister of Culture doing what I'm doing here just now. And sitting in a hotel like you and I are just now getting the news, they're opening the Checkpoint door.
Morocco.
In Morocco, yeah, there were quite a few people staying in the youth hostel there. This was in January, February, So early winter, and people are not hitchhiking at that time. So the only people on the road in those days were very hippie kind of people. Gee, this is long before the hippie. This is 10 years before hippies, really, before the late 60s down or something. This is the early 60s, 61, 62, 63, 62, 63. And so the people were there were just slightly extraordinary Americans that were Europhiles. They wanted to be in Europe. They found it really cool. It was the beginning of the kind of hippie trail to Tashkent, to Tibet and Nepal, which I never made, by the way. But it was the beginning, and this was the stopping off spot for these first hippies that were following in the footsteps of romantic writers from the 30s and things. And they were quite fascinating people. And I stayed in Morocco for about 2 weeks, and in the youth hostel, which was quite cheap, with the remnants of money at scrounge from Gibraltar. I think I'd actually got 10, 15 quid sent out from home. I only said I needed that much so I could hitchhike home. Instead of hitchhiking home, I'd go on. And anyway, her name was Rebecca. But anyway, we went out one night and we ended up in a really weird, a place called the Little Boy Belly Dancing Club or something. And we went in and there was this Arabic music there's an Arab orchestra with single string kind of fiddly things. The music was fantastic. I love world music. years later, when the Rolling Stones had painted black, I'm sure they must have been in the same club, and out came these little boys belly dancing, and I'm this American girl. Because I thought they were all girls that were dancing. They're really nice. That's not girls, that's boys. God, so it is. And most of the audience were men. I think she was the only woman in the place. From being fascinating and wild and wonderful, it became a wee bit threatening. It was an odd place. So the pair of us left, and I had this big woolly sweater on, and gave it to the girl to wear, as a gentleman would, of course, and froze myself as we walked back to the youth hostel. There was no real, I was really quite a gentleman. I had no kind of, I'd left a girlfriend behind in Scotland. There was no romance on the road. There was no time for it. I wasn't quick enough to have a quick wham bam thank you ma'am. I just wasn't that kind of a guy. I couldn't do it, I couldn't just see somebody and lust after them. I'd have to be in love with them. I was just one of these kind of guys, So whenever there was a wee hint of romance, that would be the beginning, but I didn't develop over the next few days or weeks before. And with this girl, we got really quite intimate as we were getting back to the youth hostel. But nonetheless, when we got back, she went to the girls' section. There was a girls' dormitory, and there was a boys' dormitory. We stayed in. And of course, I was looking forward to the next day because I thought this might happen. And there, next to my bed, when I got up in the morning, was my sweater folded incredibly neat with this note, with this wonderful expression, which I didn't understand at the time. She said, "Merci mille fois pour tout, or pour tous." Thank you 1,000 times for everything. For the sweater, or maybe it was for the sweater, I can't, but it was "Merci mille fois," the expression, because I use it ever since. I use it with other people. "Merci mille fois," and I say it to lots of people all the time, and it stuck with me. But that was the nearest thing to fucking romance on my whole trip. And I was away nearly a year. I had no romance. Lots of sightings, lots of talk. It's funny when I read my diary, I talk about girls all the time, and the girls I saw and the girls I met. But looking back, it was the fantasy of a young man lusting after it and not being able to do anything. Girls are older than boys. I think they still are. Girls mature quicker than boys. And the girls I fancied were always 2 or 3 years older than me. And they were mature and sophisticated, hardened or something. To me, they were awesome. I needed somebody. When I got back to Falkirk, I was suntanned. I could speak a bit of French. I was incredibly over the top in terms of being cool, or I thought I was. You know what I mean? And all my pals, Falkirk's Hicksville, small town, super little town, loved it. But somebody like me coming back, I'm still on after all these adventures, I was like a hero. And I had stories to tell. You can imagine how I lived off it, Richard. And sure, at that point, all the girls. But I don't. The one thing I've always found offensive is like kiss and tell. Talking about. I'd never talk about shagging. It's nobody's business. It's not, and it's so outrageously personal. I never think of it, and I'm a great storyteller. I love telling my stories, but I'd never tell these stories. But I must confess, getting back to Falkirk, I really was serious king of the heat for a few months. When I came back, I did have a lot of people around me, and it was like, meeny, miny, mo. And when I came to the girls coming back, but that wasn't the big thrill. I still in a way wanted to get. What was good of coming back was my mum came. My mother's my heroine. I'm a ladies' man. I like women, but in those days. There was no thought of settling down. Christ, I was a guy. Get around and thought of marriage and kids. But at 19, I'm too young for all that nonsense. And even career was not on adventure was everything. But I did come back, and by this time, my mother, when I worked on the farm, obviously I was writing home, corresponding. My mum was sending me NME, and keeping me informed, and even sending me records of the Beatles. What was happening. And so it was things like, Love Me Do had come out just before I left. In fact, that time I was in Worthing. When I was in Worthing, the biggest hits were Everybody's Doing It, Little Lever, not Kylie Minogue. Not Kylie, it was your time, that's only a few years ago. No, Little Lever, 1962. And Bobby Darin, every night I sit here by my window. Things. There was a kind of in-between. Rock had gone a bit wimpy. Little Richard and Jerry Lee Lewis and Chuck Berry had actually slipped a little bit in favour. Cliff Richard was huge. You know, and it was kind of become a bit bubblegum. The whole thing had become a bit lightweight and Dixie Counter Strings. Adam Faith was big, you know. And we needed something to happen. America wasn't delivering. Elvis was a boring old fart by this time. Still a young guy, but he'd gone into the movie, you know, Blue Hawaii and all that stuff. All that, you ain't nothing like a hound dog. That all gone. That was, forget it, you know. He was a blue-eyed boy, all-American boy, you know, friend of the president, all that stuff. So rock and roll was essentially kind of dead when I left Scotland. You know, within 6 months, and just before I left, the Beatles, so there had been rumours about an NME tip sheets, you know, the back page of the NME. There was this buzz in Liverpool from this band of theirs that had done well in Hamburg, blah, blah, blah. And they were called the Beatles. Remember the name Beat, because I like beat names. I went, oh, and the spelling, everything. I went, oh, that's cool. That sounds cool. I'm going to like them. Don't know who they are, but I want to sound. I'm going to like them. And then Love We Do came out. I thought, it's quite good. I had harmonica. And I just discovered Bob Dylan by that time. And I was more into folk, hip folk, than I was into rock. Rock was just uncool. Well, when I came back from France in the summer of 1963, the Beatles had exploded. So I said to her, Mum, get me a job on records. I've got to get into this. I know something about records after all, but I tried the first time 3-4 years ago. And she got me a job at an Edinburgh record shop. And it was a sensation. They knew nothing about the Beatles and the Stones. It was old ladies that ran the shop, and I knew. I said, can I do the buying? Buy 100 copies of that, buy 50 copies of that, buy 200 copies of that. And of course I got it right. I was so hip at doing it. My mum took me back into the shop in Falkirk, and I became the manager there. And then her boss opened this, like a lot of British people did, bought his house in Spain. You know, but he rented or leased a place in Mallorca, and leased his beach bar, and asked me if I'd go and run it. The only regret then I had was I had to give up my Bob Dylan tickets. Bob Dylan was coming to the Edinburgh Playhouse. I had to go the week before he was appearing, which was a bit of a drag. But I went off and ran the beach bar in Mallorca in 1965 for 6 months. And of course, all my trips to Spain, I spoke poco español también, you know, I spoke a wee bit of Spanish as well. So having spent some time in Spain. So, and my adventures really came home to roost. I felt confident. I'm now 20, I'm really old, I'm 22 by this time, you know. Felt old enough and manly enough, and I'd fallen in love by this time. I mean, I did want to get married by this time, which was a bit of a drag, because I couldn't take my girlfriend. But she promised to come out and join me, like they all say, a month later, and she did. And it was great, because I'm there pining for her. I loved it, Mallorca. A lot of temptations, you know. And again, I'm not promiscuous, you know. I'm not saying I'm not tempted, and I'm an outrageous flirt as well. But you know, but I was pining for my girlfriend to come out, so she hitched right out for a pal of mine and joined me. And we had a great 6 months there. And met Chance Chandler. I came back, got a job in London, in record shops in London, and ran these record shops from late 66 till the summer of 1967, late 67, during which time my girlfriend, wife-to-be, came to London when we got married in May 1967 in Hampstead. And, but she was pregnant, and as the baby developed, you know, and she was going to antenatal classes at the hospital, she hated it. It was like a sausage factory. It was so ruthless, and she couldn't wait to get home. I want to go back to Scotland. I said, great, let's go back to Scotland. And even though London in '67 was wonderful, I got a white label copy, 7-inch acetate of, Liam Gallagher, eat your fucking height, love this. I never got to keep it. I wished I had it now. This is about 2 months before Sgt. Pepper came out. And a pal of mine worked in One Stop Record Shop, which was in South Molden Street, and in turn he was pally with an engineer around at Apple Studios, or around at Apple, where the Beatles were cutting. They hadn't made the record there, but they were cutting it. Sgt. Pepper, or what was to be Sgt. Pepper, we didn't know that's what it was going to be at the time. And this engineer guy had come round and said, well, white, you know what an acetate is? You know, it's hard, well, an acetate's a hard disc. It's even harder than a record, which is like the master disc. Or it's a cutting from the master disc, which you get, you only play them a few times because they're almost like shellac. They're called acetates. And he had an acetate. No, it's an actual, it's called acetate, but it's actually vinyl. It's like a metal vinyl type. It's a hard disc. You played it on record, you know. And it was a hard 7-inch disc of A Day in the Life. So the guy came in, and I was running a record shop called Disky in Piccadilly Circus, believe it or not. It was a touristy place. And right on Piccadilly Circus, it was the size of a newsagent's tiny wee shop, record shop. And it was open at night time. You used to have to pay fines because you weren't allowed to open shops at night time in those days. But the boss was happy to pay fines to keep it open. There were token fines, you know. And he was milking the tourists, and I worked all the hours of day and night to make money, and loved selling records and buying them. I was the buyer and selling. Anyway, my pal came round and said, "I've got a copy of a Beatles record. Don't play it in the shop. I play it quietly." And I said, "Oh, okay." So I put it on, and I had speakers on the outside. So A Day in the Life from Sgt. Pepper was first broadcast in public by me in Piccadilly Circus 2 months before the album came out. And this guy freaking out, "Bruce, no, you can't play that, you can't play that." Oh, fuck, I played it, you know. The English army had just won the war. And it became a revolutionary record and a revolutionary song. So it was great. And hanging out at the Bag of Nails and Tramps and all that, the clubs in London in those days, and everyone was there, the Beatles, the Stones, and Hendrix. And so I must admit, that was when, you know, England swings or London swings. You know, it was like what they wanted to recreate with Britpop and the Spice Girls track. It's not like that now. It was a natural thing then. We didn't hate London then. We actually loved London, us Scots and us Northerners. It was a great place to be, and people were cool in London then. I can understand exactly why the Beatles went to live in London. They were wrong, because it spoiled London. London deserved the Beatles. You know, they should have stayed in Liverpool. It'd been better for Liverpool or better for them. But they did move to London, as everyone else did too. But anyway, I got back to Scotland, and within a few months, I started a record shop with my brother Ryan. Did discotheques as well, mobile discos, to make money in 1967 back in Scotland.
What was a mobile disco?
A mobile disco was the thing that was sitting next to us tonight. Guy with 2 turntables. We had my brother, being a hi-fi man, built these. It was the first mobile disco decks I'd ever seen. My brother built them. We did this mobile. We were getting paid up to £300 and £400 a night in 1967 to do big balls. We did big balls playing disco. Well, mind you, when I say we played disco, we played we played, you know, Simple Simon Says, and, you know, the records of the day, mind you.
Yeah.
I used to play the Incredible String Band, played things like A Day in the Life. I mean, people didn't like me sometimes because they wanted to dance. So Tamla Motown and soul music, or, you know, or more up-tempo rock music was a thing to dance to. But I'd play all sorts of weird psychedelic things, hoping people would just sort of trip out on the floor, and they did, kind of. It was quite cool. But when you were doing posh people's 21st birthday parties, you know, I went to play Scottish country dance music and things. So anyway, that was a great way of making a living, and again was entertainment. And at the same time, my brother said, "Look, I'm fed up with hi-fi. I'd love to get into records with someone. I love records, but I don't know anything about buying and selling. You've now been doing it for years and years. Would you help me out?" And I'd come back to Scotland and got a job in a record shop, managing it. So I said, "Sure, I'll help you at night times and weekends, and I'm doing the disco with you anyway," and all the rest of it. And I did. And I was able to, of course, I had great contacts, and we imported records. This is the underground days, beginning to come in. After Sgt. Pepper, the whole thing went very underground, and all these groups emerged, or were emerging, like British groups like the Pink Floyd and the Incredible String Band and things, but American groups like Zappa and Fart, Neil Young had split from Buffalo Springfield, and Grateful Dead, of course. And the British didn't know about that. Cool people did. The record companies didn't even think about it. That'll never sell. So these records got released in America and never get released here, or at least not for 6 months. And I imported them. So our shop, or my brother's shop, became an immediate overnight success in Scotland. I mean, people were coming from all over the country, from Edinburgh and Glasgow to this wee shop in Falkirk. So within a month or two, I joined him. He said, "Look, can you leave your job?" I was working in a shop in Stirling. And I said, "Yeah," and join me and become a partner. So we became partners. And again, the success continued, so much so that we had to expand. And I'd always looked forward to going back to Edinburgh, which I'd left in 1959 when we moved to Falkirk. You know? And Edinburgh is my home, in East-West, home is best. And I'd loved to have gone back as a kind of a bit of a hero. I'd left as a 15-year-old dunderhead that got kicked out of school, essentially, you know. So I come back as a not very old guy, 1969, 5 years old, and opened my first shop on Rose Street, which runs parallel to Princess Street, and called it Bruce's. And I had these bags I found at Bruce's, and the rest became a real legend in Scotland. The shops became incredibly successful as a cult. I had red carrier bags. So the marketing side of it was great. We just got it spot on.
All right, so that was the beginning of your record shop.
That was the beginning of my record shops as they became known, and as the famous record. They became very famous in Scotland. And Island Records, who I'd met when I was in London, had just started. The very first single was Paper Sun by Traffic on their Pink label. They'd released records before, but licensed them. My Bonnie Lollipop, Millie, Spencer Davis would Keep On Running, Give Me Some Lovin', fantastic group. But they were licensed through Fontana. But these were Island Records. But he then went completely independent, Chris Blackwell, and formed the Pink, what he called the Pink label, which is a pop label, it's a rock label, and started it with Traffic. Again, so we grew together. We were great pals and had a great association with them. And the Bruce's record shop and Island Records, we kind of grew together in the late 60s, 70s. And it was a great period. In the early 70s, the Lord Provost, we began to expand into other towns as well, Glasgow, Kirkcaldy, Stirling, Dundee. I got Rod Stewart to open my Dundee shop. He's never opened a shop in his life. And it was at the time Maggie May was #1 all over the world, and he was the biggest pop star in the world. And he opened my shop in Dundee, and he closed the main street. And his fee, if you like, there was no fee, but he did it. Amazing. He must have been in a good mood or something. He never does things like that. Although he's a big showbiz type, Rod Stewart. I mean, he's going to Dundee. But Celtic were playing Dundee. The football teams were playing that day in Dundee. So Rod and I went to the game after he opened my shop. But it was nearly a riot. The window cracked, and it caused headline news. It was fantastic. So we had a great run. We overexpanded and got taken over by Guinness because we nearly went bankrupt. Other shops then opened. Virgin started a few years after us, and other shops, and HMV revamped, and they really went to town. And resale price maintenance stopped. That, by the way, was you had to sell records at the same price as any other shop. You couldn't cut price, which meant you just had to be good at buying and selling. And the difference between one shop and another was the buying, knowing what to buy, displaying it, the attitude. It wasn't price. If you wanted to buy a new Beatles album, you would shop, you would get it from Bruce's because it was hipper to buy it from Bruce's. Nowadays, you go to Asda because it's £3 cheaper than Bruce's or whatever. I don't have Bruce's anymore, you know what I mean? And that's what's horrible. For shops that help great artists and work in it, their margins are cut too far. They can't cope with it. They need volume. Big shops can do it with volume, whereas loss leaders could even lose money doing it just to attract people in, because they're selling so much other stuff. Record shop, that's your livelihood. You take some profit, And we were just we caught on about price cutting. We were a big enough chain to buy bulk and to get discounts and pass it on to the public. Just cut our margins, cut some costs, maybe cut the wages a little bit. But none of us got paid that well. When the biggest wage I ever made out of Bruce's was $6,000 a year, the year I left, 10 years later, 1980. Anyway, in the early 70s, the Lord Provost in Edinburgh asked me to run a pop festival because they felt the Edinburgh Festival was too elitist and snobby. He was a great Lord Provost. His name was Jack Kane, a socialist. And he said, I think the Edinburgh Festival was wonderful, Bruce, wonderful for Edinburgh, but it's so snobby and middle class. I mean, and rock and roll is such a big thing in young people's lives, and I want young people to be involved from all the places. But we can't afford it. We've got no subsidies left to give it all to opera. On the other hand, we don't believe in sponsorship. But with you, if you would run something, you're a great guy and everyone knows you. If you ran it, we will allow you to associate in sort of the Edinburgh Festival present, which was great. But of course, the minute you mentioned a festival to agents in London, and I'd never promoted in my life, or I didn't know, the fees doubled. That was paying ridiculous fees. And we played it. I mean, I took over this theatre in Edinburgh for 3 weeks in the festival, and ran a concert every single night. And I had Kevin Ayers and Gone, Can, Procol Harum, Lindsley Schwartz, Stomach Yamashita, Sun Trader, Planksty, and The Chieftain, A lot of folk stuff, the Incredible String Band, John Martin, a lot of sort of cool stuff from the day, nothing overtly pop, Findlay folky, Findlay hippie, you know, which was kind of my style. And it was a financial disaster. It's an artistic triumph. It was good. I got good write-ups, and I got good cred for it. But we lost a lot of money. And I vowed I'd never promote again, and I haven't since. I really admire promoters, the risk they take and the effort they have to put into it. And it was, I mean, you were treated like shit by the tour managers and the agents. And I didn't. I was out of my depth. It wasn't my business. And to suddenly jump in and do a major league thing like that from scratch. I promoted a couple of gigs in the 60s, followed it, but nothing serious. So that gave me a taste for, and I'd always liked artists. And my friendship with Island Records, I'd encouraged them to say to me, Bruce, why don't you start your own record label? And I said, because I couldn't afford it. Record labels cost millions. In fact, you know, we're a big retailer and I do well. No, you're always mentioning acts. You mentioned the Humble Bums, you know, Billy Connolly, Jenny Rafferty, the Average White Band. And we never signed them, but they've gone on to big things. So you've obviously got quite good ears. We'll back you. So I went out and found a band. I thought, wow, my own record label. Great. And I went out and looked for this band and I found them. It was funny looking for a band. I never looked for bands before. I just looked to find bands I liked because I'd enjoy them. I'd maybe buy the records, but not to discover them. So it was funny with professional eyes and ears, you know, a bit pompous actually. I still feel the same even tonight when people ask my opinion, what did you think of us? I'm like, oh, you were great, you were good, I really enjoyed you. I mean, what am I meant to say? You know, people want to say, well, what they want you to say is, make me a star, you know, you can do something for me. I don't know how to do that, and all I can say is, I like you and I don't want to be.
If you don't want to be negative.
No, and if it's a professional decision, I want to be able to go to them and say, I like you, let me sign you. Anyway, so I found this band, Cathy Jack, brought them to Island Records, and said, we don't like them. And I said, you never like anything I liked. But that's the whole point. It's my label, not yours. I'm not just going to be a pair of ears and eyes for you. I'm a pair of ears and eyes for me, and you back me. Well, fuck you. What am I to do with this band now? I've now flirted with them for weeks. I like them. We're falling in love with each other. I've promised them marriage. Well, I'm going to marry them. Fuck you. And Island Records is my favourite record label. So I became their manager, the band's manager, and took them off and signed them to Epic, who were really sweet. No, I still loved Island. But it did piss me off, yes. I mean, it ended our relationship. So I signed it to Epic. It didn't work out. We made a couple of albums, but it wasn't working, and the band finally said, Bruce, it's not working. So I split. Jake Riviera came along. Chiswick Records and Stiff Records started in London. Johnny Rotten happened, the Sex Pistols, punk happened, and a new indie scene happened. I thought, I don't need millions of pounds to start a record label. I can do it for a few £100. So I started my own record label in late 76, early 77, called Zoom Records. And I signed the Valves and a local band called the Valves. And in fact, I produced it. It's on the credits, produced by Bruce Findlay, first record for Adolph's Only. I was walking down the Autostrada all shagged out. I don't want to be just another damn crowd. Adolf was a piss artist. Okay. Adolf was a piss artist. Okay. And it was great. It sold 15,000 copies, went to number 1, number 2 in the indie charts, in the new indie charts. It was good. And I was off. The second single was Mature, and his band Slick, who were teeny bop heroes, but were obviously going to fail miserably because of punk rock. And they come up with a pseudonym called BBC2 and a song called Put a Picture in the Picture. Would I bring it out? Yeah, sure. And that sold 13,000 copies. And also went top 5 in the indie charts. And then Simple Minds came along and saw me. A record shop chain, Zoom Records, I was famous, 1978. And by that time I'd done a license deal with Arista Records. With Zoom. Well, that was kind of it. Simple Minds was the last one. I had a band called London Zoo. 2 of the guys from London Zoo are both journalists now. David Sinclair at the Times and what's the other guy? It's usually on MTV or VH1 or Sky, being a pop pundit. He's the singer. Doesn't really matter. But London, the bands I had were first of all the Valves, BBC2 stroke the Zones they became. Simple Minds, the Cheetahs, the Questions, who went on to sign to Paul Weller's label a few years later, had a minor hit. Mike Heron from the Incredible String Band. And that was about it. And it didn't last long. I only produced, I think it was 11 or 12 singles I finally released at the end of the day. After I released Life in a Day and Chelsea Girl by Simple Minds, I think London Zoo just came after that, and that was the end. I folded the label, the record company, and I fell out. Aristar were licensing and stuff. And it wasn't a clever deal. I was very naive and concentrated on managing Simple Minds and gave up the label. So from 1980, I gave up the shops and the label and managed Simple Minds. And that's when it really, I mean, I started to manage Simple Minds from 1978, but I still had my title as record shop managing director along with my brother, and I still had Zoom Records. But I let these things go, and by 1980 I completely given them up and concentrated fully on Simple Minds management. I met them because they came to my shop to tape. Jim heard of the label, knew who we were, and I knew who he was. He was in a band called Johnny and the Self-Abusers, and so were a couple of the other guys in Simple Minds. And they'd split up, and the other half of the band formed a band called the Cuban Heels, signed to Virgin. And this half formed a band called Simple Minds. Got another couple of guys in, Derek Forbes on bass, and Mick McNeil on keyboard, and made a demo, and brought it to me, and brought it to a few other people as well, but including me. And it was brilliant. I loved it. I think it was the best thing I'd ever heard in my life. It's certainly from somebody I didn't know, I mean somebody local though. Although I had heroes, I think my favourite all-time band, not even Simple Minds, are my all-time favourites. You know, I love them, and they were great. But the Incredible String Band are my all-time favourites, and their friends. John Lennon's my hero, Bob Dylan. So I have other favourites, but Simple Minds are a different kind of place. I mean, they to me were the hippest band in the world at the time. I just thought they were everything. And for the next 4 or 5 years, we began to realise the kind of, or I began to realise, they did as well, a different kind of thing perhaps. But for me it was great because I was associating with a band and I was talking with people who treated me with tremendous respect because they were very, very, and believe it or not, in the late 70s, early 80s, someone was incredibly hip, you know, and perceived as hip. He was very much big NME and Aldemir loved them, and John Peel, and you know, we developed this huge cult following in Britain and Europe and America, and it was great days. Although we weren't making money, we were always getting funded, and we gradually got to the stage where the funding was repaid and we began to make money and go into profit. It was a gradual thing. And then, of course, it broke through and became a monster of it. But it was fantastic. It really was a truly fantastic period, particularly since I'd kind of failed as a manager before with Kathy Jack and felt a bit of a failure as a manager. And I even said to Simple Minds, you've got to get yourself a manager. I'm your record label boss. And they went, but you are managing us. You can book in our gigs, you do all this stuff for us. I know you've set us up with a company and you're sorting our books out. You're advising us. I mean, you do it all for us anyway. Why don't you do it? I mean, do it. And I said, well, okay. You know, and I've been doing it for about a couple of years before I gave all the other things up, as I say, and went for it full time. But I didn't really kind of know what I was doing literally at the time. I knew kind of some of the ground rules, but I didn't know a lot of them, which was quite good in a way because I didn't care about them either. I just broke them. I broke the rules. You made your own rules up as you go along. You can't do that in what we're doing. That's what we want to do. We think it'll work. No, but you don't understand. That's not the record business, you know. You can't go to America without a record deal. You can't go to Europe until you've broken in Britain. You can't do these things. You can't make this experimental album. It's ridiculous, you know. People want you to sound like Gary Newman or Spandau Ballet. And I said, well, we don't. You just want to associate us with these groups. This was Aristar Records in particular. We fell out badly. We made 3 albums with licensed, and there were Zoom Records, buried Zoom. There was no, the idea of having a licensed label is like Creation with Sony. You don't think of Oasis and Sony, you think of Oasis and Creation.
Yeah.
You know, the Simple Minds, even the fans think of Simple Minds in the early days and Aristar. I mean, the real fans know it was Zoom, but only the first album had a Zoom credit. Zoom ZULP1, the catalogue number was. And their first single was ZUM ZUM ZUM10. It's my 10th single. you know, so they gave me a credit there. I had a logo and everything, you know. But they buried me, and I didn't have a proper deal, but I could have sued them. I didn't think to fight them, you know. And they buried us, so we were perceived as an Arista band, which was not cool. Although Arista had Iggy Pop, Lou Reed, Patti Smith, and interesting people. They weren't having hits with them. They were having hits with Shawali Wagon and Barry Manilow, and a band called, and one of these mod bands that was a secondary Secret Affair. They weren't doing well with Iggy Pop. And but we identified with them. We quite liked them because they had Patti Smith and Iggy Pop. Oh, that's cool. And Lou Reed, you know, the band met Lou Reed and David Bowie together in those days, and I loved it. Recorded an album with Iggy Pop, in fact. We did some backing tracks. David Bowie was interesting.
The Wild.
It was called, no, the song was called, I want to fly a criminal, fly it sight. I want to be a criminal, fly it sight, was the chorus. And David Bowie wanted this, David Bowie, dads, you know, and that sort of cotton thing. And he got some of it. We were recording it. Rock.
Yeah.
So no, later, 80, 79 or 80, 1980. Rockfield in Wales, and we were recording an album. We were recording Tons and Fascination, the first album for Virgin. Was it then or was it one before? I can't even remember now what album it was. It was about, they recorded very prolifically in those days, Simple Minds. Recorded 5 albums in 3 years almost, you know, 3.5 years. And David Bowie was producing.
We got 10 minutes.
Well, David Bowie was producing Iggy Pop in the same studio as we were doing our album. And he came into the studio and saw the guy, how you doing, guy? And they were thrilled. I mean, David Bowie, he was a hero, particularly James, he loved, absolute hero. And for him to come into the studio and acknowledge the band in the first place, talked about the records, and I thought, you know, to be American. So it must have been the time we were doing Tons and Fascination. Because he knew who the band were, and he was really, really friendly, very nice and very charming, chatty. Like I said, like I am, he's a very chatty guy, you know, friendly, put everyone at ease. Listen, you fancy coming and doing some backing vocals? Oh yeah, great. So it was great to work with David Bowie and Iggy Pop, who became a friend. Iggy Pop became a friend. And maybe that in fact was the second album. It was, I think, 1979. Yeah, 1979. Or maybe early 1980. So these were great experiences for the band in those days, and meeting other heroes, meeting people like Iggy and David Bowie, older guys who were cool, because most of the old guys weren't cool to young guys, you know what it's like. Everyone's a boring old fart. But not, David Bowie wasn't. David Bowie was cool. He was okay with the new wave generation. So was Iggy. In fact, Iggy was coming into, Iggy's like the way Paul Weller is now. He was like the godfather. You know, he was the godfather of punk. And the way Paul Weller is kind of godfather of the new Brit pop scene. I think he's cooler than that, perhaps. You know? So very, very good early days with the band. And we had a love affair in Simple Minds and myself. It was a great love affair. And you know, we met other bands that were just starting out at that time and became pals, like bands like U2, Paul McGuinness, and I were great pals. And grew and developed together, along with a lot of other bands too, for that matter. Echo and the Bunnymen, Bill Drummond. Didn't meet the Smiths, and didn't particularly get off on them. And one of the drags about managing a band is that they've also got their prejudices and biases. So they weren't particularly fond of The Cure, for example. And The Cure didn't like Simple Minds. But I liked The Cure. But it was a little drag, like, you know, I never went to see them or anything. Because I was too busy with Simple Minds. And any night off that I would be with the band, you know, it's a Cure gig on, it's a little rock now, you know, they wouldn't want to. They're always bad. I mean, Echo and the Bunnymen used to badmouth Simple Minds, but we were pals, still are. We were mates. We went up in Australia together, the two bands, and we got on like a house and hung out with each other, you know, and same with U2. But except with U2, they didn't badmouth us. We were bosom buddies. We worked together and did gigs together. And I'm still friends to this day. And so the Bunnymen. I never got to know The Cure. And there was still, in the same as it is now, there were still camps of artists. There was always the London-based groups, you know, and the northern groups, the groups that came from Ireland or Liverpool, or Glasgow, and they were quite a London-based group, so we just thought they were fucking arse. Still are today, a lot of them anyway. So that's London for you. Oh, excuse me. No, like that. Yeah, those early days of managing them, and those first few years there's no question, these were the most exciting years. But particularly, they were exciting not because they were new only, but because they were also growing all the time in stature, and we were making headway. We felt we were making headway. It was a slow headway. We weren't having the commercial success that some of our contemporaries were having. Our contemporaries being people like Tubeway Army, and as I say, Spandau Ballet and Duran Duran, who came in slightly after us, but were having huge success. It wasn't until the fifth album of Simple Minds, New Gold Dream and Promised You a Miracle, that we had this huge success. And then we went on, and there were lots of different things happened. Amnesty International tours, Live Aid in America, in Philadelphia, the Mandela concert in 1988, and helping set that up and being involved with the anti-apartheid movement very heavily. I'm doing that concert, selling millions of records, of course, going to number one in America, going to number one all over the world, having lots of number one albums here.
Was it a hectic job?
It was very hectic, but it was a different kind of job. It's certainly on a different level, and it's not hard work compared to digging coal out of a coal mine, or working on the roads, or labouring, or working in the dockyards. I mean, it was easy. It's relative. It's hard work, yeah, but anyone that complains about it pisses me off, to be honest. It was very hard work.
What did they complain about?
People complain about stress, and I must admit it ultimately probably tracked us up as well. But I still wouldn't even complain about it after that. It could have been handled differently. I wasn't tough enough for that. But I think people complain about the stress and the publicity and the demands that are made on you. But in actual fact, you can begin to call it your own shots. You can take your time. Peter Gabriel suffers a bit from stress from time to time, but certain artists say, I'm not going to go onto the rat race, just because I've made it there.
What about Oasis?
Well, I think that's a problem with Oasis. I think they've got to live up to their own height. We were never quite like that. We never got tabloid press. The only time the band began to get tabloid press is when Jim married Chrissy Hine. And then much more so when he divorced her and married Patsy Kensit. Jim was married to Patsy and has a kid, which is now, James Kerr, who's Patsy's son, who's still with Patsy, of course, when Jim gets hacked at. So only then, when they hit the tabloids, that really was after me. I split with Simple Minds in 1990. And even with Christie, although we had some press at that time, not very good press either, I didn't like it. I hated tabloid press. We never sought it. It didn't help make our career. Oasis, unfortunately, benefited from the attention the tabloid press gave them. As the Culture Club and certain bands do. We never depended on that. We depended on the Old Whistle Desk and the Tube and the NME and John Peel and sort of hip journalists. That was our press. And we never ever sought or looked for or got tabloid press. We avoided it. It's not too difficult to avoid it. If you make a career with tabloid press, then you die by it as well, sadly. So we avoided that like the plague. And although we were arguably one of the very biggest bands, us and the Police, I think, are the record of the most consecutive number one albums in the 80s in the British charts, like 4 albums each, debuted at number one during the 80s. So we're right up there with the biggest band in Britain, or if not Europe, and quite big in America, not huge, big in Australia, big all over the world, South America, all over the place. So we were big, but never saw ourselves, we never went like the U2 wanted to be the biggest band in the world. We didn't, we just wanted to be the greatest band in the world. It was, or just great, just wanted to be liked and to do well. However, when you begin to make a turnover millions of pounds, the whole business affects you.
Well, what was the end of music?
In the end?
Yeah, the music
No, the music was everything. The sales were not everything, but because you have charts, And because you have track records, sales records, and because you read about other people doing this, it's like award ceremonies, charts. If somebody is higher than you in the charts, if somebody gets the #1 band award, if somebody pulls bigger crowds, if somebody gets more press, then you can be, or somebody is richer, making more money than you, even though you're huge and you're seen as equals, how come they're twice as rich? You know what I mean? Well, I don't know. How come? So what? Who cares? Who cares? Is my attitude. You know, I don't care. We are where we are. You know, I'd rather be Lou Reed than Gary Barlow. You know, but Gary Barlow's probably sold more records in 3 or 4 years than Lou Reed sold in a lifetime. But who's hipper and who means more and who's got a longer career? I'm not knocking Gary Barlow. He might well go on. He's a young guy still. You know, but you know. Well, for me, he's better. That's all. It's my taste. And if I'm going to identify with certain artists and certain business people or heroes, or you know, we all need a kind of guide in a way. You know, who do we aspire? I mean, some of us become totally, utterly unique, perhaps. You know, the Richard Bransons of this world. But we have certain heroes and role models and things. And my role model was not. I mean, the funny thing about the Beatles being a role model for people, you can have 2 reasons for having the Beatles as a role model. One, they were the biggest band the world might ever have. No matter what Oasis or the Spice Girls or anyone else think, they had no chance. You know, with the utmost respect to them. But they weren't only the biggest band; they were fucking great. They were brilliant, and particularly, I mean, John Lennon for me in particular. I mean, even his career after he left the Beatles. I mean, people say it was never as big again, but John Lennon, when he died, he was John Lennon is dead. John Lennon does this. Whereas when you read about it's like Paul McCartney, ex-Beatle, or was, and now he's Paul McCartney. But only now, I think it's because he's become a knight. And in fact, because Paul McCartney is the biggest selling artist of all time. But he's not my hero, and I think he's a great guy and everything else. Good on small big shit. Oh, Keith Richards is cool, you know. I mean, Keith's an icon. But I don't play guitar. I mean, Keith's twofold. Keith can be a hero to a fan, just a pure fan who doesn't have to play. But he's also a muser as well. He's a musician's hero as well. I mean, John Lennon is not thought of as the greatest guitarist, or even the greatest singer, but for me, he's both. You know, I don't care about the technique of guitar. Jimi Hendrix wasn't the greatest guitarist in the world, but he was.
He was good.
He wasn't the best. He wasn't the best, not in a technical sense he wasn't. He wasn't a craftsman in that sense. He was a fucking rock and roll giant.
Towards the end, he just got into stuff too much.
Yeah, he did. Too much. Psychedelics.
I mean, I love about 3-4 albums. Band just
sensational. Sensational. That's what was love.
Down the world.
Well, he's fabulous. He was an innovator. He was an original. John Lennon's an original. Jimi Hendrix is an original. Bob Dylan's an original. Keith's an original. You know, and the good thing about them is that they have genuine heroes. I mean, you heard Hendrix talking about Clapton. He just thought Clapton was God. And that's his contemporary. Lennon, Dylan was a huge hero, and of course Elvis Presley and a lot of the 50s artists, so was Paul McCartney. I mean, these artists genuinely acknowledged their heroes. I mean, Keith just is full of respect for all the black blues guys, you know, from Chicago and things. I mean, just full of respect. These guys, that was the great thing about them. They didn't go about saying I'm the greatest, but they were, because they were our greatest. They were our generation, and they were our heroes, you know. And these kind of artists were great, groundbreakers. And that's how I wanted my band to be. And for a long time we were. And it saddens me a bit that Simple Minds have been kind of scaled down historically, you know. Well, they've gone quiet, but they're wealthy. They've got a lot of money. They've got time on their side, and I think they are now victims of the pressure to be good or to be something that you've maybe lost. And what Simple Minds have to do now is to recognise that they're guys in their late 30s. They're still young guys, and I mean, David Bowie's still making great records at 50. So is Lou Reed. So is Neil Young. You know, I mean, so is Keith, you know, Bob Dylan's come back. The great thing about these artists too.
This podcast is sponsored by Camera Museum of London and Tang Cigars, located at 44 Museum Street, London. Thank you for listening to a Fish Out of Water podcast. This is your host, Richard Lippman. Should you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, please get in touch.